All right then. Hello everyone and welcome to yet another exciting webinar from the Change Leader series Break Free. So today we'll be looking at the topic Mastering End-to-End Test Automation Framework Selection. My name is Geraldine and I'll be your host for today. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. Your line is currently muted, but don't worry, you can submit your questions during the webinar through the chat option that you see at the bottom of your screen. And we'll answer your questions as a part of the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And please note that this webinar is currently being recorded, and we'll send out the link of the recording through an email so that you can have a watch later or share it with your friends or colleagues. So with that being said, let me quickly share a bit about what pCloudy is and what we are trying to do to build aha moments for testers and developers. Next slide, please. pCloudy is your digital playground that is equipped with all the tools required to test your apps on the go. With the most diverse set of real devices and browsers, you can be sure of expanding your target audience across different geographies globally. Some of the core capabilities of a product include continuous testing, DevOps, advanced automation, AI-based visual testing, robotic process automation, real-time test analytics, and much more. Our cloud-based testing infrastructure hosts a rich, diverse cloud with over 5,000 plus real devices and browser combinations. So if you want to know more about pCloudy, do sign up on our platform and start exploring. So now to share a bit about Break Free. Break Free was an idea that birthed out of the need for change in the testing domain. We've seen the testing industry evolve and grow over the decades as a few leaders took the risk to break free from traditional approaches towards testing and come up with a lot of new ideas and practices. And we believe that this change can be accelerated at a much faster pace. So we took the liberty of identifying and inviting a few change leaders who are breaking the mold and embracing change to see the QA industry evolve. And that's what Break Free is all about. Our hope is that these sessions would spark ideas in each one of you to be the change in the QA industry for the industry itself to grow into greater leaps and bounds. So with that, let me welcome the change leader for today, Mesut Durukal. Mesut is a seasoned professional with over 13 years of experience in the QA industry and is currently with Indeed Japan as Senior QA Automation Engineer. He has a deep expertise in test automation and integration with CI/CD platforms, facilitating test processes, and building the test strategy and lifecycle of projects. He is well versed in the Agile Scrum framework, technical organization, people management, and all aspects of project and QA management. In addition to his technical skills, Mesut is also a frequent speaker in international conferences and has contributed to the testing community by authoring books and insightful articles on testing. So without any further ado, let me hand it over to the speaker for today, Mesut.
Thanks a lot, Geraldine. Thanks for the kind introduction and welcome everybody. I hope this will be a productive session, and if you have any questions or comments or feedback, just feel free to share. So if it is interactive, it will be more better and even more productive. So as Geraldine told, I'm a quality assurance engineer and I'm doing the quality assurance automation as well. As most of my colleagues, we are doing the test automation as daily basis. We know that quality assurance is not only testing, there are lots of different improvement rooms in the whole software testing lifecycle, starting from the analysis of the requirements and then designing some test cases and executing them, and finally doing the continuous maintenance, like analyzing the executions and collecting some evidences and trying to find some improvement rooms in the product as well. So the aim for the quality assurance is improving the team confidence to provide the best product for the end users or the clients. So that being said, quality assurance is not only testing, but testing and test automation is we can say, the heart of quality assurance, because especially in terms of the continuous testing, if we don't do test automation, we cannot catch up with the comprehensive scope. Test automation is very important because in that regard, we can do the iterative executions a lot of times a day, because we are not having big releases or seasonal releases anymore. But every day we are having like small deployments, or maybe we are raising a lot of merge requests. So to ensure the quality, or to ensure that those frequent changes do not break anything, we should run the regression tests. And of course, doing that manually is not possible. So in short, test automation is very important. And today we will talk about test automation as well. But what we will focus is selecting the best options to build our testing framework, test automation framework. There are lots of different options. So which one should I choose? For example, should I basically choose Java language? Or maybe should I choose JavaScript and use some different frameworks? Or maybe should I use any language and build my framework from scratch without using any tools? Which is the best option? So we will talk about this. So I'll give you the answer. And let me tell you what I will tell at the end. Now, the answer is there is no specific tool or library or a specific option that I can recommend to you. So the answer should depend on your requirements. So what we should do is to analyze our requirements, what kind of features we should implement. For example, on what kind of browsers we should execute our test cases, and lots of different decision criteria we can think about, and finally we can make our decision. So what we will talk about is, first, I will make a quick introduction. I will list several options, and then I'll share some rankings collected from some different sites and from different surveys. And then I will share kind of literature survey. I will collect or I will share some collected information or comparisons from different studies. And I will share a little bit my personal experiences. I implemented one test case on lots of different options. And I will share my personal experience as a, maybe we can think that as a developer experience. And finally, we will wrap up. So let's get started. First of all, as I briefly explained in the beginning, even starting from the programming language we can use, or in what we can implement our test cases, we can make our first decision. So it can be either Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, or anything else we can choose. And that, on top of that, we should implement our test cases. And when we have the automated test cases, we should execute them, we should run them. So which means we need a test runner. And then after we are running the test cases, of course, we have to assert that the actual results are meeting the expected results. So in the test scenarios, we have some test steps and we have some expected conditions. This is the behavior or the specification of the product. And to be able to assert that, we need some assertion libraries, or maybe any other plugin that will help us to make those assertions. And then maybe to do the API testing or the UI testing, we need some more libraries or plugins again. One of the very commonly used tools is Selenium for UI testing. And for API testing on each programming language, we can use another option. But instead of all these, there are some kind of modern E2E test automation frameworks. Those are already providing lots of different options built in with built-in libraries or the plugins. For example, let's say if you are using Cyprus, then I don't need to install any other external framework or library for the UI automation, because I can already use the Cypress libraries or the methods or the functions already built in. So we will talk about all these options and which one should I choose, or while I'm choosing one of these, what kind of decision criteria I can think about. This will be the brief motivation of the talk. So some of the decision criteria we can think about is, first of all, the execution speed is very important, because some of them are running slower compared to the others. Some of them are running really fast. And there are different types of executions. For example, we can run in headless mode, or which means we don't see any browser interaction at all. It will be running in the background. But we can run in the headed mode as well, which means we can see what is happening on the browser itself. Or we can think about the ease of coding. For example, while using these different frameworks, which one is more user friendly? Like which one is more easy to use or more easy to implement. This is also very important in terms of the developer experience and flexibility. For example, while we are doing our testing activities, we are not running our test cases only on a specific platform. For example, not only desktop version, but also the mobile versions, right? Because nowadays the products that we are developing are running in lots of different platforms. The end users have mobile devices as well, so it is not only the PCs, but sometimes the different mobile devices with different screen sizes and different resolutions. So how I can easily scale to execute my test cases on different platforms or different versions, how flexible those options are. This also we can think about. And of course, documentation and support is very important, because whenever we have a problem or issue, we should be quickly finding some solutions or alternatives provided by the community. This is also very important. And while using different features or the specifications of the frameworks, of course, if they are paid services or free services, this will also decide or affect our decision. And finally, some kind of tricky features are not easy to implement on some of those options. For example, some of them are not supporting very well opening a new tab or a new page, or whenever we are trying to handle the alerts or the pop-up windows. Some of those options are not good enough to support the full functionality. So this can be our decision criteria. So as a warm-up, let me share some rankings collected from a site which is called the State of JS. So on this site, there was a survey being performed each year. And in the last series, it was done with the attendance of, I think, almost 40K people. And it was performed by key people driving this survey. And they collect some information on different dimensions. The first one is the retention. Retention means they ask people if they want to use these frameworks or the tools again. And this ratio compared to the number of the all attendees. So we can see that, for example, some of them are the unit testing frameworks, and I will mostly focus on the E2E testing frameworks. So, for example, we can see that Playwright is doing really well. It is a 95% retention rate. It is very high. And then we can see that Cyprus has 85% retention rate, and Puppeteer and the other frameworks are going after those. For example, Test Cafe and Selenium does not have too much or too high retention rates as the others. And then the next dimension, they asked their next question, or the category they asked for attendees' opinions are the interest rates, which means if they want to learn these products, how popular these products or the frameworks are in the community. We can see that Playwright is again very popular. Most of the people want to learn it. And then again, we can see Storybook and Cypress, and then coming the Puppeteer or Selenium, WebDriver IO, and the other frameworks, including Test Cafe. And then the next category is the usage, which means if some people would use it again, or maybe they don't want to use it again, but somehow they used this framework, the ratio of the number of these people in the total number of all the attendees. So we can see that again, Cypress and Playwright are actually, sorry, this time Playwright is not that much high, but Cypress is really high and commonly used. 42% of the whole people is somehow using, or maybe actively using, or somehow once used this framework. And then we can see the Puppeteer, Selenium, and then Playwright is coming. Because we can say that Playwright is relatively new compared to the other. I think Cypress was released on maybe 2018, 19, something like that, if I'm not wrong. But Playwright was released a few years later than that. And the next category is the awareness, which means how people know these frameworks or the tools. We can see that Cypress is very well known in the community. And then Storybook was really very known in the community, and Selenium, of course, it is almost like 80%, 77, I guess. And then Puppeteer, Jasmine, testing library, and Playwright is again a little bit low rate because maybe due to still not mature enough and relatively new. But all of these frameworks, we can say at least 40-50% is known in the community. And there's one more statistics collected from another side, which is the NPM trends. I pulled the last 6 months trends. This is the download rates. We can see that Cyprus is the mostly downloaded framework. And then it is coming, I guess, Puppeteer, and then it is Selenium WebDriver, and then Playwright Core. So there was a decent decrease by the end of the year, at the end of December, I guess. Maybe my guess, it can be just a Christmas time, but somehow it was decreased, and then the download rates would go to the normal levels again by the start of the new year. So after this, some statistical information, let's go over some comparisons. Like in this section, I collected some evidences or some benchmarking studies from different people, from different organization or studies. So what they are doing is they're head-to-head making some comparisons. And in most of the studies, they are asking to the, again, as a survey, asking to the attendees as well. And they're collecting the feedback from the audience as well. So I will share some of them, and then we will jump in to my personal experiences. So the first study I want to share is that it was an event called the Let the Code Speak. It was performed by Philip Rich and Andy Knight. These guys are the ambassadors of different frameworks. The former one is for Cyprus, and Andy for Playwright. And what these guys are doing is they are having different categories. For example, for element interactions, they are providing their solutions, and they're asking to the people by sharing head-to-head their solutions, which one is more maybe user-friendly or maybe more feasible to the audience. And then all the audience share their votings, and then eventually they sum up, they accumulate all the votes, and we can understand which one was more acceptable by the users or the audience at least. So what they asked is, first of all, they asked about the element interactions, which was in that case, in that regard, which framework was more convenient to use. And we can see that 62% of the audience said that maybe Cypress was doing better compared to the Playwright. And then going over the other questions, for example, dealing with iframes, Cypress was really weak in these terms. And while waiting for elements to show up on the browsers, it was almost same, 52% for Cypress. But for alerts, new pages, and the languages they support, and finally the browsers they support, Cypress could not do that much well compared to the Playwright. And for API testing operations, I'm not sure how we should consider this, because most of the time we are separating the backend testing and the front-end testing, right? But if you somehow want to test both of them with the same framework, we can consider this API testing capabilities as well. So in short, you can do API testing with both of them. But according to all the audience to this event, they said that maybe Cypress was maybe more user-friendly or more convenient to use in terms of the backend testing, API testing. And for page object model, it was almost same. By the way, page object model is we want to encourage to use while using Selenium and the other frameworks, right? But for the modern E2E test automation frameworks, a page object model is not recommended officially, because they already designed their frameworks in a way that we don't need the page object models. Because we will a little bit talk about this, but they are working asynchronously. So sometimes page object models and waiting for the returns of the methods may cause some troubles. So it is not recommended. So in that terms, the votes coming from the audience was exactly the same, 50%. And they made even the rematch of this event. They made the second round. And then they asked some different questions as well. For example, how about developer experience? How about finding selectors or test patterns? And how about the login operations? It can be in any other login approach, like providing the username or the password or any other credentials, or dealing with the plugins or the execution ease or execution speed and the reporting. I think I had one information regarding the execution speeds in the previous slide. Yeah, I missed that. So they said that they implemented the same test case under the same configuration. And the result was Playwright was running 4.6 times faster than Cyprus. So this was the measurement by done over the same test scenario by these guys. And another study. This time, this was shared by Michael Lynch on his blog post, and he tried to migrate the test cases he implemented in Cyprus to the Playwright. So what he realized, he made some comparisons. First of all, again, which is very consistent with the previous study, he says that Playwright is running 5 times faster than Cyprus. He made some executions on both the local PC and the CI pipelines, and the result was Playwright was running 5 times faster. And then he tried to implement some different features. For example, he tried to assert some element attributes, and then he tried to do some other assertions. What he realized is, in terms of the coding is, sometimes in Cypress, you have to wrap what you captured and then continue your next operations. Because normally in Playwright, you can just add a await keyword to wait for the asynchronous operations. But in Cypress, it is not possible to do in that way. So what you should do is, first you should capture an element or any other operation, and then you should wrap in the Cypress format, and then you should continue with your next text steps. So there are lots of, sometimes there are lots of different inner loops in Cypress. Because in Playwright, you can just implement your lines one by one by adding just await keyword in the beginning of the line. But in Cypress, it is a little bit more complicated to do that. So in terms of coding he says Playwright was doing a little bit better than Cypress. And he investigated the support from the developers or the maintainer people of these tools. And there were more open issues in Cypress repository, he realized. And finally, in terms of the resource allocation in CI, because when we push our code, normally we execute in the virtual machines in the CI pipelines, and sometimes we are running in Docker images. So first of all, the Docker image should be downloaded with the Playwright or the Cypress installed inside, and then we can execute our test cases in that virtual machine. So downloading this machine as well, the download process itself, regardless of the execution of the test cases, will be slower in Cypress, because he said that the Cypress image is 940 megabytes, where the Playwright image is only 650 megabytes. So I'm trying to avoid saying anything subjective, but of course, all the frameworks have different strengths and different weaknesses. And as I told in the beginning, there is no clear answer. So there are lots of different dimensions we can think about. But there are some obvious things as well. For example, if speed is important for me, obviously it seems that Playwright is running faster than Cypress. But for example, in terms of ease of coding as well, Playwright might be a little bit better. But of course, Cypress has some other strengths as well. So we will make a final summary at the end. Don't worry. I will remind all the key points of all the frameworks again. This is another study just done by someone else, namely Corey House, and the same test scenario was implemented in 2 different options, and we can see that again, Playwright is a little bit more easy to understand, because he just, as we just discussed, he just added a wait keyword in the beginning of each line, and he doesn't have to add some more rep code. And in this scenario, what we realize is there's a cross-domain issue as well. What means he starts with a URL, And in the middle of the test case, the test jumps into another URL. So it is going to navigate to another domain, which we call as cross-domain. So in these terms, Cyprus did not support this feature at all, but recently they added this feature, but still it is a little bit complex and complicated. So in Playwright, you can just continue your assertions. When you click, the website is navigating to another URL, but you can just do your assertions to assert that the link is properly set. But in Cypress, it is not that much smooth. So you have to run the origin code to do the cross-domain operations. So I will a little bit speed up to quickly go because there are some duplications in these studies, which means these studies are consistent. And of course, they might implement different scenarios, and they can make their executions in different environments, but most of the information is consistent. So this another study was done in my organization in Indeed by some teams, and they share some similar information. And in terms of the execution speed, they relate this to the working principles. They say that the Selenium, for example, is working with the WebDriver protocol. This is why it tends to execute fast. But Playwright is running with the Chrome debugger protocol. But these two is running apart from the browser as well. But Cypress is running on the same browser. So it is just running some scripts. So this tends to run a little bit slower compared to the other options. So summing up all the information compared Playwright with Cypress, we can see that especially based on some features, Playwright is doing really well, but Cypress is having some difficulties, especially supporting the iframes or the file operations. For example, if you want to download file or upload file, or managing the alerts or opening new tabs in new pages, Cypress is having some difficulties. And especially in terms of the speed, we can see that Playwright is running 5 times faster. But for the other things, there are lots of different similarities. For example, on both of them, we can generate some HTML reports showing the execution details like execution duration on each individual test case. Or, for example, whenever a test case fails, we have a chance to retry in both options. So, and we can even capture the screenshots or even the video in both of them. And the configuration management is very well in both options. So we can just introduce lots of different environmental variables and different configurations in the config files. But again, just for ease of coding, I wanted to open another parenthesis. This is one important aspect. And the other important aspect, on the other hand, is this time not ease of coding, but ease of understanding the code. So the readability of the code. So this time, I can be a little bit subjective. My personal opinion is Cypress is a little bit more easy to understand. For example, again, this is one code. I implemented in both options. So if I just read the line, for example, on the right-hand side, there is a Cypress implementation. For example, I will read one of the lines, which says, Cy.get one of the elements, and then it should be disabled. It is just like the natural language that we are using. It is just the English sentence. So I can straight away understand what it is doing. It is just getting some elements, and it tries to assert that the element should be disabled. That's all. I don't have to worry about understanding the code or what is being done by this code. So after this Playwright and Cypress comparison, this was the longest one because mostly I can say that these two are the main locomotives of the frameworks mostly used in the community. But we can quickly go over some different comparisons as well. For example, Test Cafe versus Cypress. We can see that lots of different execution details here. It was again done in one team in my organization. And what we can see is the execution speed varies when we run in our local environment versus when we run in our CI pipelines. So this may depend on lots of different things. For example, even the initialization of the test runner can be different in these different options. This is why maybe running in the local environment, Cypress is taking less time compared to Test Cafe, while running on GitLab, Cypress is taking really long time compared to Test Cafe. And again, for some feature supports, especially iframes or handling multiple windows or tabs, we can still see that the Cypress is having a limited support, but Test Cafe is having a well support on these features. By the way, of course, every day they're trying to improve these products and the frameworks. For example, Cypress didn't support executing the test cases on Safari at all until, I guess, the end of last year, but they now are supporting, but it is still kind of pilot usage. So even if you want to use Safari executions in Cypress, they are still using playwright on the background. So you can somehow execute your test cases on Safari or on WebKit, but they just recently added this support. So previously it was not supported at all. But what I'm trying to say is, even if some of the features are not supported yet, they might be improved in the future and they can be added in the future in all these frameworks. And when we check the Selenium versus Cypress comparison, we can see another event, very similar event as I showed in terms of the Cypress versus Playwright. This time, again, the same event series, which was Let the Code Speak, this time performed by Angie Jones and Colby Fayok. These guys, again, are the ambassadors of these frameworks. And we can see in some aspects, Cypress was doing really well compared to Selenium, but especially, again, related or directly attached to some feature supports, Selenium was providing some more support compared to the Cypress. And again, the same event series performed another episode by different people. This time, again, Angie for Selenium, and again, Andy for Playwright. And the majority of the votes coming from the audience was endorsing Playwright. So the result of this match was the win for Playwright. And again, we can see some information regarding this comparison, and they share that which languages are supported by these frameworks and which test runners we can integrate or we can use as a plugin while we are using these frameworks. But in terms of these aspects, they are doing really very similar to each other. So only on specific aspects, they have some differences. But of course, the main functionality and the main features are already provided by both options. So without any further ado, let me share my personal experiences. So what I have done after this literature survey, I wanted to use those frameworks by myself. I wanted to implement, and I wanted to feel how the user experience or how the usability or the understandability or the ease of coding is they're doing on each of these options. So what I have done is I selected one test scenario, which was already implemented in my automation set. So what I did is I implemented this scenario with all the other options as well, in addition to the solution that I was already using. So this scenario is a very simple one, which is basically going to the one URL, base URL. And then normally when I first go to the web page, then I have a button, but at first it is disabled. So right after going to the URL, I'm doing an assertion to check that the button is disabled. And then after I type some queries, then I should see that the button is becoming enabled after providing my query. So this was just a job seeking web page. So users can navigate to this web page and do some search for some jobs in different areas. For example, in Japan, let me find the engineer related jobs, right? So I can provide a keyword, which is the engineer, and I can provide a location, like find the jobs in Tokyo, and I can click the button to perform the search. This is the scenario. And then after I clicking the button, of course, I'm supposed to go to another page. and I should see the search results. But of course, I have some other assertions after clicking the button, which is checking the URL if it is properly set with the keyword that I provided. And in the new page, the query field is still there. So I will make an assertion if it is including the keyword that I already provided in my previous test step. So in this scenario, there's no complicated feature, like there's no alert, there's no iframe, there's no drop-down menu, and there's no cross-domain. Everything is working on the same website. So it is pretty straightforward. But I have some key aspects. For example, first of all, it is very important to run this on desktop and the mobile version as well. Because in Japan, most of the users love using mobile devices, and they love especially using iOS operating system, and which means the Safari browser. So especially Safari execution was very important for me. And for testing the mobile version, the application that I was using was not responsive, which means if I change the window size, I was still not able to test the mobile version. So what I had to do is I had to add a custom header to my request, which is adding a user agent information to the header. In that regard, by this way, I can mock the browser as I'm using from a mobile device. So customizing the request in my execution was very important for me. So if those frameworks are flexible enough, enabling me to perform this step was really a crucial decision criteria for me. And of course, all the other aspects like ease of coding, the code understandability, and the execution speed, and all the other aspects. So after I implement all this, I realized that I can pass lots of different execution arguments to my execution command as well. And in the meantime, of course, I can utilize the config file to pass some different configurational variables as well. And I made a feature matrix, like which one is supporting which feature or which is not supporting. So as a summary, in short, by introduce some different custom fields into my requests to customize the header, I realized that by Selenium and Nightwatch, it is possible. I'm not saying it is not possible, but there was not a very straightforward way to do that. So you have to deal with the browser capabilities or the execution options, and it is not that much straightforward. But in the other frameworks like Cyprus or TestCafe, there are already some built-in methods you can utilize. So it was easier to use in that regard. This was the first criteria. And then running the headless. Again, in Selenium, you have to deal with browser options and the browser capabilities. But for the other one, it is just an execution argument. You should just set a flag. That's all. You don't have to do anything else. And Safari at that time, when I did this study, again, Cyprus did not support Safari at all. But now it is kind of supporting. It is kind of possible to execute on Safari. And for reporting the results, everything, all these options are giving the chance to generate some HTML reports, but especially Cypress. This is one thing I love about Cypress. It has a dashboard and it is super easy to use. It is even giving a chance to track the flakiness. You can understand which test cases are flaky on the dashboard, and you can track lots of different execution details. And taking the test cases, like in other frameworks, it is called as a annotation or marker, we can say. In Cypress, you can add text to all the individual test cases. And even before starting the execution, for example, in the before hook, you can already read the text of the tests. So for example, by running this command, this that any specific tag is set to something, you can basically skip even before starting the test case. So it is giving a lot of chance in terms of the flexibility. And for other debugging purposes or the retry mechanisms, most of the frameworks are having chance to modify these execution options. And of course, I did some measurements as well, but it was not a very scientific, just a couple of execution results in different environments. So again, it was very similar to the observations made by the other studies. So I will try to wrap up, and then we can discuss if there is any question coming from the audience, or if there is any feedback or any other opinion. I would be really very glad to hear your ideas. Or maybe we can even ask if some people are using any specific options, or they are using some other things, and maybe they have some recommendations. So, but first of all, the summary. So what we have talked about, we have gone over lots of different options. But I'm not saying this one is the best option, because the key idea was, first of all, clarifying the requirements, which features we should need, or in what kind of execution environments we should run our test cases. And based on these requirements, we can do our decisions. But a very few key aspects of all these options are, for example, Cyprus. It lacked support for some specific features. This is one weakness of Cyprus, as I realized. But one real strength, which is in place in Cyprus, is its dashboard and smart parallelization in CI. You can run all the tests in parallel, but you can divide the suite in the spec file level. For example, there are lots of different spec files. Some of them you can assign to a machine, and for some others you can assign to another machine. But in Playwright, for example, you can still do the parallelization, and even within a spec file, if you have more than one test case, you can split the tests within the spec file as well in the individual test case level. So in Playwright, parallelization is even more mature compared to the Cypress. And one more very important aspect or the strength of Playwright was the device emulators. So if you use any of the device emulator, you don't have to do the custom header edition as well. You can just use the mobile version. And for Selenium and Nightwatch, some features were not straightforward to use, but they are really lightweight and fast and understandable, especially Nightwatch. But of course, there are some different aspects as the documentation and the community support as well. So please make your clarifications. First of all, know what you need, what kind of test you will implement, what kind of execution environments you will have. And then after a comprehensive study, comprehensive benchmark, do your decision. This is a call for action. And I added all the references that I shared because I shared lots of different literature survey. You can find all of them in the slide. And thanks for listening. Again, I will be more than glad to answer the questions if there are any. Geraldine, are you there? Can you help me to go over the questions? Or I think there are already some in the Q&A session. So yeah, okay. So I can start going over them one by one. The first question is, Cypress use as API automation? Yes, you can use. You can basically send your request and collect the responses, and then parse the response code and the response body and do your assertions. You can use. The second question is, the survey is related to JS ecosystem. Yes, JavaScript and TypeScript, these two, but not the others. I think this question relates to the first survey that I shared. Yes, it is JavaScript plus TypeScript. Next question, does Playwright use for API testing? Yes, again, yes, you can do. These frameworks are focused mostly on UI testing, okay, mostly on front-end testing, but still you can do the back-end testing as well. Next question, which one is the best for React web app? Playwright, Cypress, Selenium? Again, same answer. It depends. The system that you are testing, the system under test, what kind of features it has. Or for example, you have cross-domain or not. So what I can say is, of course, you can test any React web app or any other application. So it is a little bit kind of both related or and not in the same time. So whatever you are testing, the test framework itself can be decided regardless of the product that we are testing. Because as a tester, most of the time we are doing our test case or testing activities in the black box manner. I don't care about the implementation details. I don't care which language they used or in what way they implemented their scenarios. But I care about the behaviors, what kind of specifications they have, what kind of behaviors or the expected results I have. So it is, I can make this decision regardless of the product code and the technology they are using. But in the meantime, I can relate because sometimes I can make the decision in which I'm deciding the technology I will use to implement my test code, because sometimes I want to share the implementation effort with the development team as well. So if I select a totally different language or the technology from the development teams, sometimes it will be a little bit difficult to share. For example, they already are familiar to use TypeScript language, and then I didn't care about the development team and I just select Python, right? So after some time, if I ask them to implement some test cases, they will say that we are using TypeScript, but you didn't ask us and you select Python. So now we can't implement. So it is both related and not to the production code, I could say. Next question, can we migrate an existing Python framework to Playwright? Definitely. And I can even say that nowadays, AI is a very hot topic, right? So AI and machine learning techniques. There are even some initiatives which are doing this migration automatically. So they are just reading the existing repository and trying to migrate to another tool or framework by just running AI algorithms. Of course, it might fail in some scenarios. I'm not saying it will do 100%, but either in automated or manual manners, it is definitely possible to migrate. And actually, I migrate my framework from Cyprus to Playwright. I think I answered this. So the next question is, does Cyprus or Playwright support mobile app automation? Yes. I mean, if the answer is native application, the answer is no. But what we can do is at least the mobile version of the browser. So I guess it is, I would say it is enough in terms of the automated testing effort, because trying to do the native app testing itself is really very cumbersome. And you need to implement lots of different things. But if you just test the mobile version of the browser, and then maybe a little bit do manual testing on the native app itself, it might be enough in terms of the testing activities, because eventually we will already need some manual testing, right? Whatever we are automating, or even if we automate all the test cases, 100% automation, we will still do the manual testing. So that automation part, I guess we can do the mobile browser version, I would say. Next question, how TDD and BDD frameworks work in Cyprus? For this, I don't have any personal experience, but I know that there are some plugins to utilize TDD and BDD frameworks. But again, I won't say any specific statement on this because I don't have any personal experience. But I know that it is somehow possible to integrate these approaches. Next question, for a complete beginner at test automation, which one would be best to learn, Cyprus or Selenium? Maybe it will be again a personal statement, but as a complete beginner, maybe I will recommend Cyprus, because there are some already built-in functions. So you don't have to build everything or implement everything from scratch. So Cyprus could be easier to start from scratch for a complete beginner. Next question. Wow, there are lots of questions. Thanks a lot. Whenever time is available, we can go over all of this. So next is, which is the best testing tool for websites and apps according to you? I think we already answered this. It depends. Okay, but I will say my personal opinion on this. Lately, I'm more tending to use Playwright, because they are trying to cover most of the features. But At first, initially, I was implementing Cyprus, but then I started using Playwright as well. Especially giving up from Cyprus dashboard was not easy for me. I really like that feature in terms of Cyprus functionality. Playwright have Cucumber framework. This is related to the other BDD question. I'm not very sure. I know there are some BDD plugins, but especially Cucumber framework. I'm not sure about this. Let's investigate this later. Do you have any suggestion for Tableau reports testing? Tableau reports are available in web version also. Again, I didn't have any personal experience on this, but if it is just the web version, it should be possible to do by these means. But again, thinking about the drop-down menus and iframes, maybe it would be better to use Playwright again instead of Cypress. Which one is the best for UI automation? We are working on the e-commerce domain and we have 30 plus websites. Currently, we are using Selenium for UI function automation. We need to do UI automation, visual testing. Please suggest me one is better. All right. So I think in terms of visual testing, I could recommend Cypress because I know that they have some packages and libraries, especially in terms of visual testing. So you could search for how to use Cypress to do visual testing activities. Which framework is best suitable to automate ML scenarios? Wow, ML scenario. I mean, I don't know because I mean, if we are talking about ML testing, it is a completely different area, right? Because it is not even, we are not talking about even a web app or even a backend. So testing ML is completely different. And I'm not sure we should make a decision among these options in terms of ML testing. Any idea whether Playwright supports performance testing? I don't think so. Again, performance testing is something totally different. So there are lots of different options to do that. Just especially for this purpose, they are implemented. Like there are JMeter or other tools and libraries implemented just for performance testing purposes. But the main motivation of these modern E2E test automation frameworks is not performance testing, but instead functional testing. So maybe you could somehow do that, maybe, but I would say it would not be the best solution to do the performance testing. Next question, your thought on Python robot framework. I like robot framework, it's really cool. And especially if you are working in robotics domain. I'm living in Japan, and before, indeed, I was working for a robotics company. And there, especially, we are using a ROS, which is robotics operating system. Especially if you are using that kind of specific product, specific system under test, robot framework could be really a good decision. But not necessarily. You can use with any application under test. But especially if you are using that kind of specific product, it might be a good decision. I think I'm at the end of the question list.
Right. Thank you so much, Mesut, for answering those questions and for the great presentation, of course. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. And I'm sure our audience gained a deep understanding of end-to-end test automation frameworks and insights and the insights that you shared today will help them make an informed decision in their upcoming projects. And if you don't have any more questions, then that's all for today's webinar. Thank you all for attending and being an interactive bunch today. And we hope you found the webinar to be valuable and informative. Remember, keep breaking free and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the QA industry. See you at the next Breakthrough webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you for organizing this. It was a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you.